People like to make fun of me because one of my hands is slightly smaller than the other. They probably wouldn't laugh if they knew the story behind it. See, back in grade school, we used to hide out in this dark corner under the stairs at lunch and share horror stories. It was the perfect spot because it was naturally kind of spooky and because it was out of sight from our teachers and hall monitors who banned everything we ever liked, horror stories included. There was one tale Kevin Farland, or Fartland as we called him, liked to tell to the new kids. The story of Baxter baby hands. I'll never forget the first time I heard it, because I started laughing and Fartland punched me in the face. Good times. So, as Fartland's story goes, there was once an orphan named Baxter who worked in a factory in town in the olden days. Back then, it wasn't uncommon for factories to employ kids to fix their machines whenever they got jammed, because they were smaller and could fit through the gears. Baxter had the smallest and most nimble hands out of all the kids working at this factory. So small, in fact, that they called him Baxter Baby Hands. He was the one they always called on to fix the big grinder near the back. One day, the foreman asked him to go pluck out a rock cut in the grinder's gears. Problem was, he'd forgotten to turn off the machine. So little Baxter walked over to this big machine, reached inside, and yanked out the rock. As soon as he did, the gears started turning again, and Baxter's hands got crushed. They say his scream could be heard 2 towns over. Baxter survived, but his hands were gone forever. He was just a poor orphan kid, so the doctors didn't bother doing anything beyond patching him up. And, of course, without hands, he couldn't work anymore. Back then, if you didn't work, you were useless. They say Baxter starved to death, holding out his mangled stumps like a homeless person begging for food, but any money anyone might have thrown his way slipped between the fingers he no longer had. A few days passed, and then one night, the factory foreman woke up to something small and soft against his cheeks. At first, he thought it was his wife's hand, but as it came in for another stroke, he realized it was much smaller, about the size of a baby hand. He opened his eyes and saw Baxter leaning over him, with itty-bitty hands growing out of his stumps. His wife found the foreman the next day, dead, with both hands cut off. Over the course of the next 15 years, every single person, adult and child, who'd been working at the factory the day Baxter lost his hands, wound up dead with their own hands missing. The townsfolk, worried they'd be next, ordered his grave to be dug up and his body to be burned. When they opened his grave, however, they got more than they bargained for. Inside was the rotting corpse of Baxter, with the foreman's hands sewn to his stumps, and all the hands he'd collected sewn to each of the fingers. They'd shriveled up like shrunken heads, looking almost as small as baby hands. Horrified, the townsfolk burned Baxter and his baby hands then and there, hoping to end the curse. That's how his legend began, Baxter Baby Hands. Some say one of the villagers took one of his baby hands as a souvenir before they burned him, so part of Baxter is still out there to this day. And if you whisper Baxter Baby Hands' name in the mirror 3 times before going to bed, he'll appear and touch you with his 10 tiny hands. If he likes how your skin feels, he'll rip off one of your hands and add it to his collection. Fartland looked dead serious every time he told the story. He'd even add to it and embellish it, saying his uncle tried to summon Baxter Baby Hands, and his great-great-great-grandfather was the foreman. I never believed the story myself. Not until I decided to prove them all wrong by summoning Baxter Baby Hands myself. I asked a friend to be a witness and recited Baxter Baby Hands' name 3 times in his mirror before walking back home and going to bed. I never in a million years expected anything would come of it. I'd played Ouija and tried the Bloody Mary thing many times without seeing anything weird. I was convinced nothing would happen. I was wrong. I don't know at what time it happened, but I know I was in a pretty deep sleep when I felt something on my face. It wasn't enough to wake me up with a start, but it did stir me out of my slumber. It was a light, soft touch against my cheeks. I thought it was the curtains swaying in the breeze, so I ignored it at first and turned over. The gentle touch followed me across the bed, and that's when I became concerned. I tried to open my eyes, but as soon as I did, I felt tiny somethings hold my eyelids down by force. Next, I tried to scream, but the same thing happened to my lips. Whatever was touching me slowly ran up and down my cheeks in gentle yet violating facial caresses. It spread from my cheeks to my forehead and chin, going from softs to firm kneading, like a cat's paws, except without the claws. I was paralyzed with fear, barely able to breathe as it happened. Couldn't call for my parents. Hell, I couldn't even see what was happening to me. I don't think I'll ever be that scared again in my life. The kneading of my face continued for at least 10 minutes, as though it was being assessed, but I'm not sure to what end. Then, the pressure on my eyelids let up and I was able to open them. What I saw defied all logic. There were blurry fingers everywhere and going in every direction. As they pulled away from my face, they came into focus, and the millions of little fingers became about 50. They were tiny fingers on tiny baby hands. Baxter's baby hands. Each little hand was growing out of its own adult finger that wiggled and bowed like those of a puppeteer. One finger remained downcast, the baby hand at its end holding my mouth shut. Every digit, small and large alike, seemed to move of its own volition, yet were all tied to a single source controlling them. That source was a man standing behind the veil of fingers. He was short for his age and wore rags that looked 3 times too small. They were stretched out as though he'd slowly grown out of them, but never bothered changing into something better suited for him. As for his face, I honestly don't remember it. My eyes were too busy looking at the hypnotic mess of his many hands. It was hard to focus on anything else. Baxter smiled and pulled his right hand closer to his face. All 6 of the index fingers on it rose up to shush me as he released my mouth. I didn't know what to think, but I knew better than to scream. Something told me it would be worse if I did. He then reached for his left hand and plucked out one of his baby hands. It came off with an innocent pop. No blood, no resistance, like a carrot coming out of soil. His right hand, or rather, hands, gripped my left one tightly. They pulled at it so hard that I started crying soundlessly. The pressure was immense, like being the rope in a tug of war. Suddenly, I heard a pop and I lost all feeling in that hand. I didn't want to look down, but my eyes did it on their own. My left hand was gone, and in its place was a smooth, bloodless stump. I tried to scream, but a pair of baby hands quickly pushed my lips together until I could only groan. I then watched as Baxter pressed his severed baby hand against my bloodless stump, I felt a prickle as the small veins on it reached into my skin and connected with mine. I could feel the baby hand, and within minutes, I could even wiggle its fingers. The sensation was beyond bizarre. I knew it wasn't mine. It felt different, but I had control of it. Baxter baby hands then put my left hand where he'd removed his own. It attached and deflated to the size of a baby hand. Without a single word, he turned around and walked out my bedroom door. I was beyond horrified. I just sat there in shock and watched the tiny baby hand at the foot of my wrist. It started to grow as I watched it. Within hours, it was almost the size of my normal hand, but it never quite made it all the way. Now, people make fun of me for my little hand. They say I'm a freak. I mean, if you didn't know it, you probably wouldn't even notice. But if I put my hands together, you can tell my fingers are half an inch too short, and my hand isn't quite as wide. I know somewhere out there, Baxter Baby Hands still has it. And I know people are still stupid enough to try summoning him. Want to know how I know? Well, sometimes, late at night, I can feel my fingertips gently caressing someone's face. But my hands are both next to me, holding my pillow.